I still can't get over what happened to my brother and me that day. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, but it ended up being one of the scariest experiences of my life. I need to get this off my chest. It was the summer before my senior year of high school. My younger brother, Jake, and I were looking for something exciting to do. We were both into urban exploration. So when we heard about an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, we were eager to check it out. It was a huge building with broken windows and graffiti all over the walls, sitting in a mostly industrial area that was pretty much deserted. Jake and I had explored a few abandoned places before, so we were familiar with the usual precautions. We packed some flashlights, snacks, and a couple of old phones, just in case. We told our parents we were going to hang out at the park and set out that afternoon, the sun shining brightly and our excitement high. When we arrived at the warehouse, the place looked exactly as you'd expect an abandoned building to look. Crumbling walls, shattered glass, and lots of debris. We walked around the perimeter first, just to get a feel for it. There were several entrances, but most of them were boarded up or blocked off. Eventually, we found a way in through a side door that had been forced open long ago. Inside, it was dark and musty. We turned on our flashlights and began exploring. The warehouse was enormous, with high ceilings and rows of empty shelves. The air was thick with dust, and every step we took kicked up a little cloud of it. We joked around and took pictures, thinking it was just another adventure. After a while, we noticed a set of stairs leading to a second floor. Jake, always the braver one, suggested we check it out. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but I didn't want to seem like a wimp in front of my younger brother. So, up we went. The second floor was different, more cramped and cluttered. It looked like it had been used for storing old machinery and various industrial parts. As we wandered through the narrow aisles, our flashlights picked up strange shapes in the darkness. We tried to make out what they were, but the light seemed to distort everything. That's when things started to go wrong. We heard a noise, something like footsteps or maybe just the creaking of the building. We froze and listened, but there was nothing more. We shrugged it off and kept moving, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. It felt like we were being watched. Eventually, we came across a small room tucked away in the back. The door was slightly ajar, and as we pushed it open, we found a bunch of old office furniture and papers scattered around. The room had a weird, stale smell, like something had died in there. Jake found a stack of old documents and started flipping through them, while I checked out a rusty filing cabinet. As we were about to leave, we heard the noise again, clearer this time, like someone or something was walking around on the floor below us. We exchanged worried glances. It was strange. We hadn't seen anyone else when we entered, and the sound didn't seem to be from another explorer. We decided it was best to head back down. When we reached the main floor, things got even more unsettling. The front door we had come through was now shut tight. We tried to open it, but it was locked or blocked from the other side. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. We searched for another way out, but every exit seemed to lead to a dead end or was similarly blocked. We finally found a small window that was just big enough for us to squeeze through. Jake went first, and I followed. I had to push and pull hard to get through the tight space. Once we were out, we ran to the car, feeling a mix of relief and terror. We didn't stop until we were back home. When we got back, we looked at the pictures we had taken. In some of the shots, we noticed shadows and shapes that we couldn't remember seeing. It made the experience even creepier. We never went back to that warehouse, and we promised each other not to explore abandoned places again. To this day, I can't explain what we heard or saw. Just a chilling reminder of how a simple adventure can turn into a nightmare. Every time I think about that day, I get a shiver down my spine. Sometimes, I wonder if someone was actually there with us, or if the place was just messing with our minds. Either way, it was enough to make me stay away from those kinds of explorations for good. This happened a couple of years ago, and to this day, I still get chills just thinking about it. I've never really talked about it much because, well, I didn't want to sound like I was making things up, but it's been eating away at me. I figure it's time to put it out there and see if anyone else has gone through something similar. It was late August, and my parents had planned this little getaway for their anniversary. They were going to a nice bed and breakfast a couple of hours away and would be gone for the whole weekend. I didn't mind being alone. In fact, I was pretty stoked about it. I was 17, and the idea of having the house to myself was kind of exciting. I was looking forward to some peace and quiet, maybe watch some movies, play video games, and just chill out. We lived in a small beach town in Oregon. Our house was this old single-story place just a few minutes walk from the beach. It wasn't fancy or anything, but it was home. I always liked that it was tucked away from the main road, with only a few neighbors scattered around. It felt secluded, like our own little corner of the world. Anyway, my parents left early Saturday morning, and I spent most of the day just lounging around. I took a walk to the beach in the afternoon, grabbed some ice cream from a stand nearby, and headed back home. Everything was normal. Just a regular day. By the time evening rolled around, I was getting a bit bored, so I decided to watch some TV. It must have been around 9 p.m. when things started to feel off. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, when I heard what sounded like the back door creaking. Now, our house is old, so it makes a lot of weird noises, especially when the wind picks up. But this was different. It was a slow, deliberate creak, like someone was trying to open the door without making a sound. I muted the TV and just listened. Nothing. I figured it was just my imagination, maybe the wind or something, so I turned the volume back up and tried to brush it off. But then it happened again. This time, it was louder, and there was no mistaking it. It was definitely the sound of the door. I got up, my heart starting to pound a little, and went to check it out. The back door was in the kitchen, so I made my way there, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. I flicked on the kitchen light and walked over to the door. It was closed, locked just like I'd left it. I even checked to make sure the lock was secure. Everything seemed fine. But as I turned to leave the kitchen, I swear I heard something outside, like footsteps on the gravel path that ran alongside the house. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened, but again, there was nothing. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. It was dark and I couldn't see much, but I didn't notice anything unusual. Trying to shake off the creeping sense of unease, I went back to the living room. I figured I was just being paranoid, that maybe the wind had knocked something over outside or some animal had wandered by. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A couple of hours passed and I was starting to feel a little better. I made some popcorn and settled in to watch a movie. It was getting late and I figured I'd crash on the couch once the movie was over. But then, just as the movie was getting to the good part, the power went out. Everything went dark and the silence was almost deafening. My first thought was that it was just a power outage, something that wasn't too uncommon in our area, especially during storm season. But it wasn't storming, and the weather had been calm all day. I tried to keep calm, but the timing just seemed too strange. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, figuring I'd find some candles or a flashlight. As I got up to head to the kitchen, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, this time coming from the front porch. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was trying not to be noticed. I froze, my heart racing. The footsteps stopped, and there was this heavy silence, like whoever was out there was just standing still, maybe listening. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was probably just an animal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I moved slowly to the front window and peeked out, my phone's flashlight off so I wouldn't be seen. There was someone out there, a figure, just standing on the porch, barely visible in the dark. I couldn't make out any details, but I could tell they were tall, probably a man. I felt my stomach drop. I was alone, the power was out, and there was a stranger on my porch. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing. What if it was just some neighbor checking on me? Or maybe someone who'd gotten lost. But then the figure moved, stepping closer to the door, and I panicked. I ducked down, trying to stay out of sight. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I confront them? Should I call out and ask what they wanted? Or should I just stay hidden and hope they went away? Before I could decide, I heard the doorknob rattle, like they were trying to open the door. My blood ran cold. I knew I'd locked it, but I also knew that if they really wanted to get in, a locked door wouldn't stop them. I backed away, trying to stay quiet, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the rattling stopped. The figure stepped back, standing still for a moment, and then they turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, listening for any sign that they were still there. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. I finally worked up the courage to peek out the window again. The porch was empty, and there was no sign of anyone. I waited a little longer, just to be sure, but when nothing happened, I slowly got up and moved away from the window. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call my parents and worry them, but I also didn't want to stay in the house alone. I decided to grab my things and head over to my friend's place. He lived just a few blocks away, and I figured I'd be safer with someone else. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door, trying to stay calm. But as I reached for the doorknob, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The doorknob was smeared with something dark, almost like dried blood. I pulled my hand back, feeling a wave of nausea. I didn't wait around to investigate. I bolted out of the house, locking the door behind me, and ran to my car. I drove to my friend's place as fast as I could, my heart racing the whole way. When I got there, I finally felt a little safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had almost happened. I ended up spending the night at my friend's place, and when I finally went back home the next day, my parents were already there. They were worried when they saw me pull up, and I told them everything that had happened. My dad checked the house and found no sign of anyone having broken in, but he did notice the same dark smear on the doorknob. He couldn't explain it, and neither could I. To this day, I have no idea who that person was or what they wanted. Maybe it was just some random creep, or maybe it was something more sinister. All I know is that I've never felt that kind of fear before, and I hope I never do again. I don't like being alone in the house anymore, especially at night. Every time I hear a creak or a rattle, I get flashbacks to that night. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't locked the door, or if I had tried to confront whoever was out there. It's a feeling that's hard to shake, and it's made me a lot more cautious. So yeah, that's my story. It might not sound like much, but living through it was enough to scare the hell out of me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're the real people lurking in the shadows, just waiting for a moment when you're alone and vulnerable.